seen incredible changes for women and minorities in this country and on the screen. What do you think, where's Hollywood? Do you think it's still getting better, or do you think they're going to hit any bumps where more people of color are in front of and behind the screen, involved in all aspects of the business? I'm just your thoughts in general about maybe that topic in general.
I can give it, I mean, first of all, I could probably spend the next 2 hours talking about
yeah, true.
But one of the things that I was an actor and a writer back in the day, and I was back in the 60s, 70s, and I wasn't doing very well because there weren't any things for black actors in those days. There was Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte and a couple other people. And then there were kind of like, there's a black exploitation period. There was a lot of bad movies that were done. They came about the black actors stuff. But I wasn't, I failed at it, right? There weren't the opportunities, and the opportunities that were there I wasn't getting. And so I left that and went back and went to law school. Became a lawyer as a job. And then, fortunately, in the mid-'80s, I mean, well, actually in the early part of the '80s, I got another chance to go back into the business where I love. And I asked this person here if it would be all right to give it another shot, and I did. So, and by that time, so between 70 and 80, there would have been a drastic change. August Wilson came into the scene. Spike Lee came into the scene. There were black directors who were making decisions and giving jobs to black actors as well as white actors and everybody else. And so now, 20 years after that, or 30 years after that, we see there are a whole lot of folks, Oprah Winfrey, Tyler Perry, there's a range of, the biggest indication of how things have changed is I could list six black directors. You don't even know they're black directors. I mean, you know, that's number one. And they're not just black directors for black movies. They're black directors who, I mean, you know, they're just
they're just directors.
They're just directors, and they hire everybody. And fortunately, that's one thing. Yeah, there's great changes. My students don't even think about it. I tell them these horror stories, and they don't even believe me half the time about how bad things used to be. And the other thing is that America's changing. I mean, let's face it. The last election, I know a little bit about. We had, for the first time in the history of the country, the white majority of voters. It's not all white people. The white majority of voters voted for the guy who lost. So we have a country that is multicultural. We have a country that is brown and white and in all colors of the rainbow. And so that's going to, by very definition, change what kind of product is going to come out of Hollywood. And the third thing that's of importance is that film is becoming international. I, for the last 3 years, taught in South Africa, and I'm telling you, more than half of the movie dollar in American movies comes from foreign domestic product. Not one country, but you go take all of the countries that we have to as Americans, we have to sell that product to South Africa and England and France and Germany and all over. And so that, by the very nature, changes. Now, interestingly enough, what happens in South Africa particularly is that African-American films aren't necessarily high on the agenda. What's high on the agenda there in terms of major distribution are the big action films that are being introduced. What I call the ones that are all about what we used to look in comic books, they go on the big screen now. So yeah, the answer is, yeah, things have changed drastically. They're going to continue to change. The changes are bigger than any of us in this room can possibly imagine, because we're going to be dealing with an international market. We're going to be dealing with an America that looks very different from the America that we all are used to. And the fact that there are artists of all ilk who are hiring people from all over the place. Now, that doesn't say that we have come to the end of the bad old days in terms of racism and sexism and all of that, because we still have had not anywhere near the number of directors, women directors who won the Oscar. I mean, if the Oscar is any kind of indication of something. And we are still waiting, aren't we, for an African American to win the Best Director. We haven't had that yet. And we've got a couple coming in terms of writing, but not directing. So there's still some left over. But I think that answers it.
Yeah, I just wanted to control.
What was your favorite movie you ever did?
The last one.
Which ones?
Doesn't matter. That's
You're
still working.
right. You know, that's the kind of question you don't answer unless I can come up. Maybe I can say the one I worked with my wife on.
There you go.
The one we did together. It's all. I mean, I'm what they call a character actor. I'm very honored to be here. I'm not a star of any kind. I've had a couple that I've been a featured performer in, but I'm the guy who shows up and does about 2 or 3 weeks work on a particular film and puts together characters and comes on the set and works with some of the stars like you saw, like George Clooney and such. Yeah.
I'm a big Law and Order fan.
Good.
And
You don't know me. You say, you said you're on Law and Order. I never saw you before. I've been on all 3 Law and Orders, actually.
when I watch Law and Order, I watch the good guys versus bad guys versus murders and all that stuff. How is it different from the TV being a judge to being the real thing?
Well, you're gonna have to ask somebody who knows the real thing. I mean, that's one of it. I mean, I hear one of the things I like about Law and Order, particularly, I'm a Law and Order junkie, as a matter of fact, all of them. I love watching them, and that is a lot of research has gone into trying to make it real, trying to make it as gutsy as New York cops are, as kind of gritty. I mean, I really get upset with the kind of things that you see with some of the other shows where, you know, the girls are too pretty, you know, I mean, the women are too pretty, and it's like, there's a lot of glib stuff, but Law and Order tends to be right there in the wheelhouse, and cops watch it. I mean, that cops
Says something.
and that says something about it. And one of the things that I found it's very interesting, I don't know if you've noticed it, but I learned what's happening in law enforcement from Law and Order. I mean, back when it was running, you know, they'd have a technology that would come on law, and you go, oops, I didn't know they could do that. I didn't know they could trace it. And then sure enough, you know, lunch, you know, all of the phones that come from a public phone. I learned that from Law and Order, and there's a whole bunch of those kind of things because they've done their research. And so,
Good writers.
yeah.
Yes.
And remember, this is, I always say this to my students, that when I say it's gritty and lifelike, you know, film, television, and theater is not ever lifelike. Life is boring. Life is boring because there's a whole lot of stuff going on all at the same time. And our minds do the filtering. We're having a conversation. I mean, you know, and this is going on, that's going on. What film does and what theater does is it forces us to focus on one thing at a time. You know, that we concentrate on what's going on, which is why it feels like it's lifelike, but it's not. You know, it never is going to measure up. I mean, right now, I'm talking to you. That's one thing going on. She just came in, she's doing a thing over there, she's doing something, she's doing something, he's doing the camera, his mind is over there. All of you are listening to me, and you've got your listening to him face on, but inside your head, there's a whole bunch of other things going on that's part of your agenda. You know? And that's how life is. Life is like all over the place. But what film does and theater does is it allows us to focus in on something. And so if I'm talking to you in a film, I'm going to be talking to you and listening to you in the film, and you're going to be talking to me and listening to me. And it's all focused in, as opposed to, good grief, can we make that movie about me? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Come on, you got to come up with the main question. Come on, the main question. I always get that question.
What?
I'm not going to tell you. I'm not
Oh,
gonna...
come on, help us out.
Now we're wondering what I know.
You got to come up with the question. I'm not going to give it to you.
I was wondering if there was ever a time you were uncomfortable watching yourself on film.
Oh, God. See, you guys are all intellectuals. That's what it is. You're all very smart. You know, yes, I'm always uncomfortable watching myself. No, I'm not going to tell you. Okay. She told me not to tell you, so I'm not going to tell you. One of the things I love about film, and one of the things that's very difficult, is that it's done. Once you've done film, it's done. In theater, you get a shot the next night. And if you don't, and once the run is over, you may get a chance to play the role again 10 years from now. And so you're always in the process. But in film, bam, there it is. It's up there. Yeah. And so let me just finish up here. And so that there's an uncomfortable, I wish I'd have done it differently. sometimes. When I do a reel, I'm very uncomfortable because I picked this reel based on I'm going for a job, and I'm usually going for a job as an older, middle-aged, middle-class judge, lawyer, doctor. That's what I look like, that's what people sort of peg me at. And so most of my roles up here are judges and lawyers and stuff. And that bothers me because it looks like it's the same character, and it's not. But to me, so that I am uncomfortable with that.
Well, I thought you made a great scuba diver.
Yeah, that was a different one.
Working with all the most famous actors, like that guy, the Pest, who played in, I love that movie. He was really, really good in the Pest. Also, the movies that you worked in. Was there any favorite character you worked with in a movie that you liked the most?
See, he came close with it. He came close with it. Okay. Yes. As I said before, when I was younger, there was only 2 actors. Actually, there was only 1 black actor of any now. There was a guy named Sidney 48. All you guys are too young to understand that.
Not me.
Not me.
Sidney 48 was, he was the man. I mean, back in, he was the first African American actor to win the Academy Award for Best Actor in '63 for Lilies of the Field. And there was always a Sidney movie, and so we all adored Sidney. It was like we would sit in the balcony, because back in the day there was something called segregated movie theaters, for instance. And so, I lived in a black neighborhood in Chicago, so it wasn't segregated; it was just all black people. But at the same time, when I went down south, with relatives, we sat in the balcony, and so we would sit in the balcony and watch Sidney. So I got a chance to be in a film that I won an ensemble Emmy for called Separate but Equal. It was about Thurgood Marshall. And I remember I said I was a lawyer way back then. And so Thurgood Marshall was one of my heroes, and Thurgood Marshall was being played by Sidney Poitier. And so, and I had a scene. I had a major scene with Sidney Poitier.
Oh, nice.
And so it was like, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I was playing a lawyer. It was about the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and I was one of the chief lawyers in it. And so I had a chance to pitch my ideas in terms of how to play the case. Sadly enough, it was the wrong idea, but at the same time, I got a chance to make my pitch. And because it was a major film, and Sidney was in it, I didn't get a chance to meet him until the day, and that happens with character acting, until the day we were shooting. So we had a rehearsal and then we would shoot, because he was busy doing a whole bunch of other stuff. And so on the day I had the scene, I had a lot of scenes, but the scene with him, I didn't see him until that day. And I came in, I met him in the rehearsal process, and it was like, flutter. And then something very strange happened. I shook his hand, and I had a mystical experience. A mystical experience. Those who don't believe in mystical experiences, close your eyes. It's a truly mystical experience. As I looked at him and shook his hand, I was transported in that moment back to the balcony as a child, looking at the screen and seeing myself playing a scene with Sidney Poitier. So I was simultaneously in the balcony watching the scene and playing the scene, and it threw me so much I went up on my lines and forgot. And I recovered enough so that we did the scene, but that was by far, without question, most memorable experience. Yeah.
What made you want to get into film? What age did you start at?
I started as a writer. Writing poetry. As a matter of fact, one of my godfathers was a guy named Oscar Brown Jr. And because I went to segregated schools in Chicago, I had been moved into a predominantly white area in Hyde Park, Kenwood. If anybody knows Chicago, it was so I wound up in the 50s being part of the young black kids we weren't bused, but we were moved into white schools. And so the middle part of my elementary education, I was in predominantly white schools. and I never had seen a black poet. And so I was running around, you know, this story. I was running around because I love poetry, you know, Carl Sandburg and Paul Whitman, all those people. And I was writing poetry, and I was around 10, 11 years old. I thought I was the first black poet because I'd never seen one, you know. And for some reason, I tell people this story, is that I had read, heard, or whatever, that it was illegal back in the times of slavery to teach black people to read and write. So I figured, well, back in those days, it was illegal to teach black people to read and write, and so somewhere along the line, it must be illegal to teach black people to write poetry. You got to be there for understanding. You know what I mean? And so I was walking around, and I met a guy. I met a guy named Oscar Brown, who I would go to school every day, and I would pass his window, and he's up there typing. And so I went one day, knocked on his door, and I said, I see you typing. Are you a writer? And he said, yeah, I'm a writer. I said, well, I'm a writer too. He said, what do you write? I said, I can't tell you. And so he said, well, you can't tell me. Okay. So he said, come on in and tell a writer. What do you write? I said, and I finally, after I became comfortable with Oscar Brown Jr., said, I'm a poet. Don't tell anybody. I'm probably the first black poet. He said, oh, really? So he goes away and he comes back with a book of Langston Hughes and Richard Wright and Color and Gwendolyn Brooks, and who I later met, and showed me that I was not the first black poet. In fact, I was one in a long line, and how wonderful it was. So I had a mixed feeling. Number one, I felt disappointed that I wasn't the first black poet. On the other hand, it was wonderful to read these poets who express life that was by life. So from there, I went into performance through Oscar, because Oscar was a writer, actor, jazz guy, brilliant man. And met Gwen Brooks and some other folks and got into it that way. So I was led into the world of performance and literature and all that by some brilliant lights in the African American and the American experience. And I was never discouraged from trying to do it, except when I went out in LA and New York and tried to get work in that regard, and there were no jobs.
So, what is your latest now?
Aside from my grandchildren, which is always the most important. I've come to it's very interesting. I've come to a place. I'm moving towards 70. I'm retiring. I'm retired. I teach in Africa. I'm retired from that. I'm about to retire from Penn State. I've come to a place where I'm the most. And grandchildren is the answer, because the most important thing to me is to do for young people what was done to me. Is to be there as a guide, to be there as a willing advisor, because you can't. I'm not telling nobody what to do. I mean, I'm going to be there if you want to ask them what might be a way to go. First of all, what I know isn't necessarily relevant anymore. You know, how you make it in the business. For instance, putting together a reel. I was very late in terms of putting together a reel. Kids have been putting reels together long before I put mine together. But I need to facilitate that process. One of the things I just did was take a group of young mixed actors, black and white actors, over to South Africa with a play written by a young African-American woman out of New York, produced by Penn State, to the festival. They happened to be there when the president was there. They happened to be there as Nelson Mandela is in the process of moving on to join the ancestors. And none of them, only one of them had ever been to Africa before. The rest of them was their first time. So Joe and I went over with them to help guide them through that process. And that's what I see myself doing. Not what is my next big project, you know, if I'm going to sign a new contract. I'm not going to turn down work, but at the same time, that's not the most important.
Yeah.
How did these movies that you were in and everything, was you paid well?
Yes.
In this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things you do, film pays very well, and you do large action adventures like Die Hard and Deep Impact, one of the ones you want to see. So you can do some of the others, like the first one you're going to see, which is Where God Loves His Shoes, which pays scale. And you do the big ones that pay the money, so you can do the small ones that are more artistic. Yeah, but they pay very well. It's actually absurd how well they pay. It's actually really absurd.
Did you lobby hard for some
do you lobby hard to get some particular, you read a script somewhere and say, wow, I love that?
Yes.
I'm not in that position.
But he did that with Separate but Equal.
I did that.
Yeah.
I fought real hard for that.
Yeah.
I fought real hard. And a couple of them I was featured on, of course, I fought for them. It's not above the politics of the situation and try to, wrangle stuff. I am sure that I got on Die Hard because I used to be in the theater group with Sam Jackson when we were on Die Hard. I'm sure there's somewhere in the mix that happened. Things like that. Deep Impact I got precisely because I had done a film early with the director, and she liked the work I did in the film called Peacemaker, and she called me in for that one. I got to a point just before I came out to Penn State where I really wasn't auditioning a lot. I would be called in to do stuff because they recognized who I was. Ed was amazing because I was the legal expert on this. Nobody else on there had a law degree. They had to keep shutting me up because I was saying, no, that's not how we do it in the law.
So they cast you in a lot of judge roles, and that
Toward the
happens,
end,
right?
in the beginning, no. In the beginning, if you see some of my earlier reel, you will see me doing, one of the things on here is playing a cop. I'm playing
The inspector.
Yeah. And so, because the problem is, this is an interesting story. The problem is, I would go in and the casting would be for a judge or a lawyer. That's no problem. I'm a lawyer. I go in, I do my lawyer thing. They go next. So this went on literally for 10 years. I never got a judge role. I got even on my first time on All My Children. I was a doctor. One Life to Live. I was a bartender or something like that. And so finally, my agent said, "Wait a minute. How can you not get these roles as a judge and as a lawyer?" Yeah. He said, "Do the audition." So I went and did the audition. He said, "No wonder you're not getting it. Because what I'm doing is playing a real lawyer."
Oh,
The way it is in the
TV and the
courtroom.
movies.
And this is now we're talking 20 years ago, and it was kind of like, that's not what people are looking for. They're looking for TV lawyers. The interesting part of that, and so I started playing a TV lawyer and TV judge. You saw in Ed, the judge doesn't act like they're playing with the tube socks. We never had it.
Like fits you with it.
In fact, if you want to look at, they're running the Martin case down in Florida.
Yeah.
Look at the judge. Look at the lawyers on there. They're boring, aren't they? They're boring. That's how the court works. Interestingly enough, though, now that lawyers are on television, they're trying to. I saw the guy sort of doing some ad libs today that were kind of funny on the court case. And the OJ trial, the guys were more theatrical in their performance. But that's fairly new. So now we got lawyers pretending to be or acting like TV lawyers who are now talking about acting like lawyers, and so who knows where the barrier is, where the lines are.
No
Yeah.
boundaries.
You said your students, what do you teach?
When?
What do you teach?
I teach theater and I teach film, acting. And I teach African American drama, a history of African American theater. At Penn State.